Hi, my name is Kylie Moore, and today I'll be presenting on Laos and the Vietnam War. The critical questions I'll be asking are, what was Laos' role in the Vietnam War? Why was their geography pertinent to the war? And what are the lasting implications for the economy and overall growth of the country after the war? The Vietnam War took place from 1955 to 1975. The war was primarily fought by the communist North Vietnam and the anti-communist of the South. The North was supported by China and Russia, and the South supported by the United States and other anti-communist allies. The conflicts also affected Laos and Cambodia, and civil wars broke out there as well. The involvement of the United States was not supported by citizens back in the United States, but the involvement was centered largely on a desire to stop the spread of communism. Despite our efforts and 65,000 U.S. deaths later, in 20 years of war, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia all fell communist. Laos was considered to be a neutral state in the Vietnam War. However, the Ho Chi Minh Trail went through Laos, which was essential to the war effort. During the war, Laos allowed North Vietnam to use what it referred to as the Panhandle to move troops and supplies to the south. As you can see on the map towards the bottom of Laos, it'll go into the south portion of anti-communist Vietnam. Simultaneously, the Pathet Lao was a communist group in Laos that was gaining a foothold to overthrow the Royal Lao government. The president of the United States at the time, Dwight D. Eisenhower, believed if Laos were to fall to communism, the rest of Southeast Asia would soon follow. So he and his successors, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard Nixon, all supported escalating air support. And what is this air support that I'm talking about? This plays into what is known as the Secret War on Laos. So in 1962, the International Agreement on the Neutrality of Laos was signed by Vietnam, China, Soviet Union, the United States, or 10 other countries. This treaty prohibited any country from setting up bases or invading Laos. This and Laos' geography also prohibited a ground war from taking place, and the president considered it a bad idea to do so anyway. But the United States still wanted to do something about Laos. What ended up taking place was airstrikes, so you could call it, and what ended up happening was absolutely catastrophic and covered up by the CIA, and unlike anything ever seen before. The goal was to prevent aid transported by the Ho Chi Minh Trail to be stopped and to prevent communism from taking a foothold in Vietnam and Laos. But more on that later. So, bombing ensued. The treaty only discussed ground infiltration, so the United States found a loophole. The United States ended up bombing Laos from 1964 to 1973, and to this day, Laos is the most bombed country per capita in all of the history of any war. To paint the picture, Laos received about a plane's worth of bombs every 8 minutes, every 24 hours for 9 years straight. Over 2 million tons of ordnance or bombs were dropped on Laos during these missions. 10% of the entire population died during the bombing, and 20% of the remaining became refugees. I actually visited Laos and got to see a cave that an entire village lived and hidden for 9 years to avoid the bombing. After the war, about 30% of the bombs dropped did not explode. That is about 80 million undetonated bombs, otherwise known as UXO. The most common UXO were known as bommies. These have had severe consequences on the country post-war. The country lay vastly underdeveloped as a result and dangerous. Children are taught at a young age to not go off trail, not to dig, or not to pick up shiny objects. In recent years, Laos sees no more than 50 deaths per year due to UXO. which was largely reduced from the 310 that was saw in 2008. And since the war ended, 50,000 people have died from UXOs. 60% of accidents result in death, and 40% of the accidents involve children. Since the war, cleanup projects and campaigns have taken place. The United States has contributed the most funding over any other country, surmounting $300 million. But to put it into perspective, in one day of the bombing, the U.S. spent $16 million. Despite cleanup efforts and those put forth by the Lao government, only 1% of the UXO have been detonated and cleaned up. Millions of bombs still lay all over the country. Laos remains a poor country, and the UXOs in war play a big part in that. Laos has the potential to be far wealthier than it stands. Forests are barely touched. There are untapped agricultural sites, minerals, and natural resources haven't been exploited, and there is so much potential for biofuel and hydropower. Many factors play into these resources being untouched, like the rugged terrain and being landlocked, low population density, and unskilled workers. However, the effects of the war also play a big hand here. Walking off trail could likely result in a bomb going off. The trails are all marked with these signs that you see on the signs, warning to stay on the trail. Laborers being unskilled and the population size can also be partly attributed to the aftermath of the war. The future of Laos in relation to the elimination of UXOs is bleak. At the rate we are cleaning them up, it would take over 1,800 years. It is dangerous work and hard to do because of the mountainous terrain and lush forests. It makes it super costly as well. Removing the UXOs would boost many of Laos' industries, increase tourism, and increase safety to those living in the villages. It kind of makes you wonder, and some hypothesize that the United States purposefully dropped bombs that would not detonate to prevent Laos from becoming a strong communist country. Whether or not there was intention behind it, it worked.